So I know last unit we learned something how to multiply radicals, but now we're going to be looking at how to multiply polynomials. First of all, the word polynomial. Poly means many, and nomial means terms. So many terms. I could have a polynomial of 2 terms, or 3 terms, or 4 or 5, or as many terms as I want. And as a reminder, terms are those things separated with a plus or minus. So I see that for question number 1, I have a polynomial on the first parentheses. I have a polynomial that has 2 terms. On my second parentheses, I have a polynomial that also has 2 terms. Now, this thing, when we multiply polynomials, it's an extension of what we learned before, sometime in the past. We learned that distributive property. Now, multiplying polynomials is an extension of that. Some of you might be like, wait a minute, I kind of remember something about distributive property. Let me remind you. So let me do an example up here. Let me remind you of what distributive property looked like. Distributive property could be like a term, like let me have 5x, and inside a parentheses, I had another polynomial. I could have something like 3x squared plus 2x minus 7. So something like that. And remember, distributive property was the term on the outside I was going to distribute. I was going to multiply it to each of the terms on the inside. And kind of like how we did radicals last unit. Remember how we saw numbers with numbers and radicals with radicals? Same thing here. It's just the whole numbers go with whole numbers and letters go with letters. So on the first term, 5 times 3, numbers-wise, 5 times 3 will give us 15. And then on the x's, technically this is an x to the 1. When we multiply letters, we just add the exponents. So 15x to the third. On the second term, 5x times 2x will give us a positive 10x squared. Notice I went 5 times 2. That's how I got the 10. And on the x's, I just added the exponents. And lastly, 5x times a negative 7 will give us negative 35x. Notice I multiply the 5 times the negative 7, and then I just copy that 1x that I saw. So that was what we call distributive property. Now, multiplication of polynomials, like I mentioned earlier, it is an extension of that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to do distributive 1 term at a time. So looking from my first polynomial, the first term is 8r. I'm going to distribute my 8r to the second parentheses. So that's how I'm going to start. So 8r times 6r will give us 48r to the second. Right? 8 times 6 is 48. And remember, for the r's, I just add the exponent. And then 8r times 2 will give me 16r. Remember, I just went 8 times 2. It gave me the 16. And then I copy the r that I had. So I distribute the first term, 8r. Now, let me erase this. Now I'm going to distribute the other term, the negative 5. I'm going to distribute to the second parentheses. So negative 5 times 6r, that gives me negative 30r. Negative 5 times a positive 2, that gives me a negative 10. So notice how I did distributive property. I distribute the 8r to the second parentheses, and then I distribute the negative 5 to the second parentheses. So every term from the first parentheses gets distributed to the second parentheses. Now I'm going to combine my like terms. So what I mean with like terms, they have to have the same letter with the same exponent. So the highest exponent that I see, I'm just looking at my r's, the highest exponent I see is r to the second, and is the only term that I see. So that's going to be my first term, 48r to the second. Then r to the 1, I see here a positive 16 and a negative 30. So then I ask myself, 16 minus 30, that's a negative 14. So negative 14r. Notice I combined those two terms in the middle because they have the same letter to the same exponent. And lastly, this term that I haven't used, this minus 10, has no letter at all. So remember, we have to write them with the letters from highest exponent to lowest. If we were doing this on paper, that's it. 48r squared minus 14r minus 10. On paper, it's easy to write an exponent. Now for our homework, because we're going to have to type it, I'm going to go 48 r to the second. Notice how I use that little, we call this a caret. It looks like an arrow pointing up. If you see on your keyboard, it's on the 6. So 48r squared minus 14r minus 10. All together. Please, no spaces in between. All together. So 48r squared minus 14r minus 10. And again, for the exponent, look at the caret that I use. It looks like an arrow pointing up. All right, let's do another example. Let's take a look at number 2. So I'm going to distribute the p. So 1p. So 1p times 5p, that gives me 5p squared. 1p times 1, that gives me 1p. Then when it is a 1, I choose not to write it or to write it if I want to. Okay, now let me erase this. I'm going to distribute the negative 8. Negative 8 times 5p, that gives me negative 40p. And negative 8 times 1, that gives me negative 8. Let me combine my like terms. So the p squared, that's the only term that has a p squared. So I will write this as 5p squared. Then I have a 1p minus 40p. I know 1 minus 40 minus is a negative 39. So let me write this as a minus 39p. And then my last term right here, minus 8. Again, if we were doing this on paper, that's pretty much what I would write. Now for typing, I'm going to go 5p to the second minus 39p minus 8. All together, no spaces in between. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. Now this one, this number 3, you guys might be like, well, wait a minute. Didn't we have to have 2 parentheses? And then what is this 2 on the outside? Because it's an exponent of the parentheses. Now this thing, what it really represents is that I have the parentheses 7 minus 3 twice. So let me write that parentheses twice. So 7b minus 3. And now let me distribute. I'm going to distribute 7b times 7b. That gives me 49b squared. 7b times a negative 3. That gives me negative 21b. Okay, so I distribute the 7b already. Now this negative 3. Negative 3 times 7b gives me negative 21b. And then negative 3 times a negative 3 gives me a positive 9. Let me combine my like terms. So on b squared, right, the exponent being the second, I have 49b squared. Negative 21b and another negative 21b. That gives me negative 42b. And then lastly, my plus 9 at the end. So my answer will be 49b squared minus 42b plus 9. All together, no spaces in between. Let's take a look at a last example for today. We have 8n plus 5 all to the second power. So literally, I'm going to write my parentheses twice. 8n plus 5 times 8n plus 5. So I wrote my same parentheses twice. I'm going to distribute now. 8n times 8n, that gives me 64n squared. Remember, 8 times 8 is 64, and then for the letters, n times n is n to the second power. You add the exponents. Then I have 8n times 5, that's going to give me positive 40n. Remember, 8 times 5 is 40. Copy the n that you had. Now, let me distribute this 5. 5 times 8n gives me 40n. And then 5 times 5 gives me positive 25. So here's for the n squared. That's the only term that I have. So 64n squared. And then positive 40n plus a positive 40n. 40 plus 40 is 80. So I'm going to call this positive 80n. And then lastly, my plus 25. So my answer will be 64n squared plus 80n plus 25. Don't forget to use that caret for your exponent. And that's how my work should look like for today.